All right, g'day MTP community. How are we doing? Today we've got a pretty exciting live for you. Just waiting for Luke to jump on in, but while he does, and while we're waiting for him to come in, we'll talk about kind of what we're going to be touching on today, and it really ties into something that's important to a lot of people and something that we're really excited about, both as rehab professionals. And here he is, Luke. Let's see if we can get him on, add him into the camera. How are you going? So Luke's jumping in now, but it really ties into something that we're very passionate about. Here he is. Hey Luke, how you going?
PK, MTP community, how are we? Sorry, I'll get myself set up here. Am I up the right way?
Yeah, that's the right way. That should be all good. All right. Hang on a second. Fix that camera up for me. Perfect. So yeah, as I was talking about, we're going to be touching on it's the topic of skill acquisition. And in terms of skill acquisition, we don't just mean kind of physical skills, but we mean any kind of skill that we're trying to learn, whether it be a language or learning something to do with our professional lives. It might be a sporting activity, anything like that. And we really think it's a cool topic to touch on because it's something that a lot of people want to be doing. A lot of people are working on, particularly in this current time where we're all kind of locked up at home, all working from home, got a bit more spare time, and what better time to really talk about kind of how we can engineer skill acquisition a bit more, how we can kind of speed up the learning curve as such, and how it also ties into rehab and some really, I guess, counterintuitive ideas that a lot of people aren't quite across when it comes to skill acquisition that really helps provide context and benefit to what it is that they're doing. So to kind of tie it into what we were talking about last week, we really want to touch back on the quote that came from Luke, which was, when it comes to rehab, people think that their mind and body are two different things. And I guess that's how we want to set the stage of the conversation for today in terms of skill acquisition. So we can give the idea that, our mind and our bodies really aren't separate and the whole thing is about our mind. So I guess with that said, Luke, do you have any thoughts? Kind of didn't really get to do much of an intro for you. Apologies there, but
All good,
yeah,
mate.
do you want to
All
say
good.
anything there?
Yeah, well, look, just to reiterate what you said, I think that the skill acquisition broadly, I think people can really get stuck into almost bucketing the way they see skills being developed rather than applying the same principles that they use in one area to another area to another area to another area and using what works repeatedly versus constantly like thinking that you're starting all over again every time you do something new. um, and so that fits with exercise rehab. It fits with learning other skills in life as well, as we're going to talk about today. So but I think just recognizing that and recognizing that if you can learn one thing, if you can learn one skill in one domain, you can learn another or multiples in other domains as well. If you apply similar principles and similar logic to what you're doing, can be really empowering for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's one of those things. I think something that I'm really passionate about with skill acquisition is the idea of the 80-20 concept. So, it's the idea that 20% of the effort that you're going to be putting into any activity usually tends to produce about 80% of the results. So it's focusing on the key things and the most important things to help accelerate that curve of acquisition. And I think a lot of the time I speak to people that I either see or people that I know that are trying to learn a new skill and they're focusing on the wrong things, majoring in the minors as such. And
Mhm.
if they understood the fundamental concepts of it, and a lot of the time, there's solid science that grounds all of the things behind skill acquisition, and you have to respect those rules, such as giving yourself proper spacing and applying proper effort and allowing the right amount of time in between activities. And when those things are done, it really speeds up the process of it and allows it to be much easier for the person on the other end. So I guess,
Mm.
while we've set the stage pretty well there, like just touching on that quote about people thinking their mind and body are two different things. Where do you really see that playing out in your experience, Luke?
Oh, it happens a lot. I mean, it plays out in the whole of society, really. I mean, so many people, they differentiate themselves philosophically or existentially, like their body and their mind as being two separate things rather than it being one intertwined organism. And so people think of learning a physical activity or undertaking exercise or playing a sport or um, any kind of physical attribute being separate to a cognitive or a mental attribute, um, and vice versa. So people that they might devalue a physical undertaking and have place a higher value on something that's more of a cognitive undertaking, and vice versa. Without really recognizing that it's the same thing, that like they can't do one without the other, right? Like, your body and your mind work as a single unit, and your brain is essentially the central operating mechanism for everything. And so in order to improve a physical attribute, in order to make your muscles bigger, you have to the brain has to develop neurally, um, strengthen pathways, strengthen signaling, strengthen its outputs, so that you can move more weight and you can do so more efficiently. And there's no different to learning how to touch type or read faster or learn a new language necessarily. The same principles apply, uh, but I don't think it's often thought of that way. And so in the rehab space, people will talk about their body as this other thing. So they'll be like, "Oh, my leg, it just doesn't agree with me. Like my left leg it's not mine. It doesn't feel like my own leg anymore. It's not mine." And so there's this sort of distancing themselves from a physical um, part of their body, rather than recognizing that what they feel in that leg is coming from their brain. Like it's not coming from the leg necessarily. Like the signals in this and the interpretation of what's going on is coming from their messages are being received that are just messages, and it's being interpreted in the brain as either good, bad, or otherwise. And so that kind of distancing from the physical is a really common thing in healthcare for sure, or as a patient and as people.
Yeah, and I think the concept and the definition of skill applies somewhat broadly. Like just looking it up on Google Dictionary, it suggests that a skill as a noun is the ability to do something well. And then it has a semicolon expertise. And essentially, if we applied in that concept and that context of rehab, a skill could be considered how we associate our movement with certain experiences of pain. And so, you know, in actually getting better and improving your condition could be considered developing a new skill. It's developing and learning a new way to do something. And, potentially a lot of the time, I know I've experienced it with my knee. I did experience pain with certain movements, and that was one thing that when I first started seeing you, Luke, back in the day, it required a bit of relearning and skill acquisition to learn how to move and learn how to do things in a new way. And so I think reframing rehab, particularly the way that some rehab is done as skill acquisition, can be quite useful for people because, I mean, it really, in a way, is no different to any other form of skill acquisition. Would you tend to agree with that, Luke?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think that like really skill acquisition is like skills are just habits. Like if you can that you've consciously and actively pursued. So if you injure yourself and you walk with a limp, you develop a limp. You do that really unconsciously. You're just developing that to work around the problem, but you're still creating a motor pathway, creating a habit or a skill of navigating around that problem. And then once that pain's gone away, you have to unlearn that trait, that skill, or that habit. And so I think absolutely agree that that your skill acquisition from a physical standpoint no different to skill acquisition from a mental standpoint.
Yeah, and I,
Uh,
I guess that to me is a very unique insight and something I never would have thought of until I thought about the concept of rehab a bit more, and as we talked about it last week, and I think that's why this is such a useful topic to touch on.
yeah, well, I mean, like really stripping it back and going like fundamentally, you strengthen whatever it is you focus on and you practice consistently, right? So if you do one thing all of the time, every day, consistently over a period of time, you're going to develop really strong habitual pathways. Like a really relevant example for me, which is a bit abstract, but it's something that in terms of skill acquisition, it kind of applies in a sense. In the last so from the weirdly, I don't know why, I've never been a nervous person. I've never been somebody who's been an anxious person or had any need to have any sort of negative habits. But from like the first day of primary school, I started biting my fingernails. And I don't even remember why, but I did. And it was a lifelong battle with my mother. Really, she was constantly slapping my hands out of my mouth and telling me it's disgusting and stop doing that. And over the time, and it rolled into adulthood, and then I would try and break the habit, and I would try and do this, and I really kind of never managed to do it. And and it was something that I was pretty ashamed of because I was always they were disgusting. Like they looked awful because I'd been biting my fingernails for 30 something years. And so, and I knew that it's a negative thing, but I didn't place enough importance on it for me, or I didn't have enough of a driver for it to properly want to make a change. And so I was like, yeah, whatever, I can just like stand with my hands in a fist and nobody can tell anyway. And so then about 6 months after, no, not 6 months, maybe 9 months after Kobe was born, a bit after, maybe a year after Kobe was born, she started putting her hands in her mouth. And then she started to like pretend to bite on her fingernails. And I realized like the times when I did it the most was when I was thinking and nothing else going on. So if I was driving the car, I would bite my fingernails. If I was like sitting, not right here now, but if I'm sitting at the computer working, I was thinking about something or watching television, I'd be like biting my fingernails. And I'd do it without even realizing. And so then she was seeing me do this, even though I was conscious of trying not to do it around her. And it instantly became a thing for me that I definitely don't want this to be something my kids do. Like I don't want my kids to see this. And so instantly the motivator, the driver for change of a habit, which was unconscious. I did it without even thinking about it. It was just, I would catch myself out biting my fingernails. And so as soon as the motivating driver was high enough, I don't want my kids to bite their fingernails too. And it scared me, the concept of her doing that. I decided I needed to stop. And no matter how many times other people told me I needed to change that, I couldn't change that until then. And I haven't bitten my fingernails since. And so, I mean, it took applying, triggers and reminders and stuff, but it's been, I haven't bitten my fingernails since doing that. Now, it seems like a minor thing to do, but like on reflection of it, I'm like I did that literally every single day, repeated times a day for 33 years, 32 years. And as soon as I was like, okay, it means enough to me to stop and change this habit, I was able to break that habit. And so undoing negative or neural pathways, or, there's a motor connection to that. There's some sort of cognitive connection to that. And it was happening without me knowing it. And then as soon as I was able to consciously apply myself to overriding that and applying the principles of skill acquisition effectively, I was able to get rid of it. And now I don't do it anymore. And that amazed me. Like it was one of those things that I actually thought that, wow, this is a headache because it's been so long. If you've been most people would say, if I've done that my whole life, I can't change that. It's just the way I am. Oh, I can't learn the new thing because I'm a numbers guy. I'm not a words guy. I've never been an exercise person, so I can't. Never played sport, so I'm just not coordinated. Like, there's going to be levels of capability, of course, but to say that you can't do something just because you haven't ever done it or you've not been able to do it so far is a cop out. Definitely. It's
Yeah,
like
like I think it's such a thing. Like mom and dad, they're always like, "Oh, we're not musical, and we're terrible at language and all that kind of stuff." And I've always played guitar my whole life, and I guess now getting back into it now that I've got more time, like it's so like I played for about 3 years and then stopped playing when I moved to university, and now that I've actually kind of understand the Jackie saying maybe I can learn to chat less. Look, I don't think there's probably not
we all
enough
have our
motivation
limits,
there.
Jackie. Uh,
Yeah, we all feel you. We feel you. We both feel you here.
well, yeah, I think Jackie's a good example of the ecosystem that you're in is going to reinforce those behaviors. So I don't think Tim is helping because I don't think Tim loves a chat just as much as Jackie does.
That's hilarious. But as I was saying, like people say, oh, we're not musical, we're not good at language or whatever. But what I've found is just looking at the most important things and really kind of stemming it back. And a guy that I really like, if I think you're quite familiar with him, Luke. His name's Tim Ferriss, and he's got some really great articles on stripping back the fundamentals of any skill and applying a framework that he calls a DIS, and essentially deconstructing the core concepts. For an example, in language, it's like learning the 100 most common words first, and then learning how to put those into basic sentences where like, for example, I'm trying to learn Portuguese at the moment, and then stripping back to understand the rules of grammar and how they change allows it to be much more easily picked up. Where a lot of people that I know went to university to do Portuguese and they can't remember any of it now. And I'm able to have very basic conversations with my girlfriend. Here she is now, speak of the devil. Um, Very basic conversations, and it's just stripping it back and not resigning myself to that idea of, oh, I'm not intuitively good at this. And as science has shown recently, that's not the case at all with any kind of skill or anything like that. And so while it is an interesting idea because it ties into what people are trying to maybe habitually erase from their lives in terms of negative habits, there's also a massive positive component of, well, essentially, I think it ties into a quote that I've heard you talk about before, and it's something I really believe in. It's the idea of resilience, and as a human species, our biggest thing is that we have the ability to adapt to essentially anything. You've got people who can do backflips, and you've got people who can speak 20 languages, and you've got people who can do all sorts of crazy things. And we all started at, I mean, not exactly the same point, but when we were born, we didn't really know much. And I guess it's just a matter of how you apply yourself throughout life to do those things. And I think as someone who's done some pretty extraordinary things in the past, do you have any insights from your golf or your CrossFit days on that idea, Luke?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that seems to hold true through most of it, and kind of the stuff that Tim Ferriss talks about and breaking things down is that, well, there's two things. One is that you need a driver. You need to want to do something in order to really retain and acquire a skill that's lasting. Like if you go to university and you do Portuguese just because you did that as a subject at school because you needed to take a language to get your arts degree, then you're not really sinking your teeth into it. There's no real direct connection to the desire to acquire that skill. Whereas, for you, there's a direct connect. Like every day you see your girlfriend as a reminder as to why you want to speak this language. And so that driver, that emotional driver or whatever it may be, is helping you to see the need to acquire that skill more urgently. And that's really important. So having a sense of urgency or a sense of intent in what you're trying to do is really important. So for me, and like in the sporting and in academic stuff, has always been, well, what am I trying to accomplish here? Like, why am I putting in this work? And is this work that I'm putting in getting me to the next step that's going to help me continue to get closer to that goal? And if it's not, then what are you bothering? Like, what am I wasting my time for? I need to reevaluate and change the path. And so, whereas I think a lot of approaches to academic learning can just be kind of like that scattergun approach, like to rehab, where people go do a subject, try to learn Portuguese, try to just soak up all of the bits at the same time, take a test, try and pass the test, and then get on to the next thing and soak up all the bits. But there's not like a really deconstructed, like stepwise structure to what they're doing. And so I've applied that same model to the rehab processes we do within MTP. Is going, well, here are the steps that we want people to go through. If you can tick this box here, then you can at least rule out, if you're not where you need to be, you've ruled out that box. Then we move on to this one, and then focus there, and then shift the focus there, and then shift the focus there. And that whole approach is taking the person towards where they want to be, but you're also learning and developing along the way. And so that can be applied, I mean, to golf. There's so many things that you can be doing in golf. There was a major problem of mine when I was younger with golf, was that I just wanted to improve everything all the time, constantly. And so it would mean I would be hitting hundreds and hundreds or thousands of golf balls a day, and videoing. I've got like catalogs and catalogs and catalogs of these little mini DV cassette tapes from video recording myself on the range and in the nets and from different angles and analyzing and stuff. And just like, then you go out and oh shit, I know I've hit some poor bunker shots, or I can't hit that shot very well, so I need to practice in the bunker. So there's like this constant like diversion of what you can be focusing on. And so the thing that really helped me actually was having less time. Like, as soon as I started to do a bit of other, I got like, well, I'll take a part-time job just to try and have a bit of extra cash flow while I'm not making any money or I'm struggling to pay my rent. Then I had a structured amount of time that I had to get things done in. So then I would go, well, what's the most important stuff I need to get done in this time to really help me so that I can get away from this crappy ass job and get on with my golf? And so doing that and being able to focus things down and distill all of the mess of everything that you could do into the most significant parts, clear those parts first, then move to the next, and then move to the next, has held true in training for CrossFit as well. Identifying your weaknesses, identifying the biggest barriers to progression, and then working at those with intent so that you can then get onto the other things. You don't need to completely stop everything else, but there's one or two or three major, maximum three things that are the primary focuses of your improvement that drive your overall progress.
Yeah, like absolutely. And I mean, it rings true to the concept that I kind of stumbled across in my early days of sports science, which was the whole block periodization idea. And if people aren't familiar with that, it's essentially a theory of sport periodization, which is just getting better at sport progressively over time. And speaking to a pretty prominent strength and conditioning coach the other week, a lot of people have adapted that to just strength training, strength and conditioning training. Essentially, they would be focusing on strength for a period, and that would be one block. And then, say, the next period, they might be focusing on a power component, which would be another block. So it's just where there might be somewhat competitive acquisitions of certain skills, because to focus on strength and power at the same time would lead to suboptimal results in either one of those two things. And that ties into essentially what Luke was talking about. And it's the same thing in rehab, really. You can't address everything at once because it takes intent and effort to do that stuff. And I've seen it in my own experience with basketball at the moment. Not able to play, not able to focus on kind of all aspects of playing. Basketball is something I am quite passionate about, and all I've been able to do really is go and shoot and do a bit of dribbling. And just in this time, like, I feel like I've actually gotten a lot better than I might have just focusing on trying to do everything. And so it's hard as an individual at times to do that if you've got no constraints. And I guess that's one of my big regrets about my early days, is not having a coach to kind of design it for me and to pick the things that I wanted to do, and to pick the things that were most important for me at the time, because we tend to just do everything that we want to do. Whereas, as you kind of touched on, if you're trying to hit all sorts of shots all the time, you're not going to get better at one particular aspect of it. And I think the hardest part is to map it out.
Yeah, well, I think that there's, I mean, it's also, there's an individual element to it, right? Like, I think that you can't discount people are going to learn differently. Some people, like, I know some of the greatest, performers and athletes in the world didn't like to practice. Like, I remember listening to an interview with Roger Federer at some stage, back, like, it was actually a reflective interview from when he just turned professional. And they were like, "Oh, how do you go about it? What differentiates you from the other guys?" And he's like, "Well, I don't like to practice. I like to play. Like, I just like to play. So I just play games. I don't really hit balls to practice. I just go and play matches." And there's lots of golfers out there like that too, that just like to play holes. They don't like to practice on the range and hit golf balls. Like, I know Tiger Woods was a guy who loved to hit thousands and thousands of golf balls on the range and systematically work his way through everything. And then there's other guys that just go out and love to just play holes of golf. They hate practicing like that. Bubba Watson, I think, is the guy who really likes to just play holes of golf. He hates to practice in the range. So, and they both won, I mean, slightly different outcomes, but they're both won major tournaments and some of the best golfers on the planet. So, individual learning has to be considered. So you have to know yourself. And I think from a rehab or an exercise perspective, it really plays out a lot in terms of the communication style of the coach or the practitioner as to how they impart that information on the person. For instance, I'm a really kinesthetic learner. Like, if you show me, and visual, if you show me something and then I can do it, I'll do it. So I can pick stuff up really fast that way. If you show me a piece of paper and like read this and then do that thing, it's just I can do it, but the process is just so much more laborious for me. Like, first thing, like, if I can see it, I'm a pretty good chance of being able to do it. If I can hear it, it's probably the next in line. But fundamentally, I need to be able to do it myself. Feel it is probably the underlying current, and then last is reading it, or like just seeing the words. Now, my wife, she needs. I can't read something to her. She needs to read the words herself. She's so visual that if she doesn't see the words, it doesn't sink in. So she needs to read at all costs. I listen to audiobooks all the time. I read as well, but reading text is much more laborious for me. It's much more, it takes me so much longer to get through the content, and I don't necessarily absorb it any better. But the audio, I can just pick up much, much, much faster. If there's a presentation that's visual, if I'm watching somebody talk about something live in person, hands down the best way for me to learn anything. And so understanding what your best ways of learning information, of taking on information are, and not discounting that you can't get better at the other ones. But if you want to fast track something, you better know how best to absorb that information so that you can get the result faster, right? I'm sure you would have the similar, from a basketball perspective or your guitar, has there been ways of learning that resonate better for you than others?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's actually something I was also wanting to talk about, was the power of the mental rehearsal side of things. I find as you get better at something, you begin to pick up like mirror neurons that become more attuned to watching other people do things. And I'm sure you'd know this from your golf. I also noticed it with surfing. Like, if I watch some surfing before I go out for a surf, or watch someone play basketball. One of my favorite players at the moment is James Harden, and you watch him play, and I mean, he's just like butter on the court, so smooth to play. And I find that after I've been watching him shoot, than going into actually practicing and kind of going through the mental rehearsal side of things in terms of, feeling like you're playing and thinking like you're playing. So there's watching someone, which is the mirror neurons, and then you've also got the idea of mental rehearsal, which is sitting back at home and kind of just imagining yourself shooting. You find that when you go out to actually shoot, the accuracy increases, 10%. So I mean, like in terms of percentage, it just feels a lot smoother.
Do you find that when you visualize, so let's say you're visualizing yourself, you're sitting on the couch, visualizing yourself playing basketball. Are you visualizing yourself through your own eyes? Like, are you visualizing you playing basketball in terms of what you actually see on the basketball court? Or do you visualize yourself as a third party viewing yourself playing basketball?
You're visualizing the feeling. It's like it's a first person, and it's how it feels. So, because there's certain situations that you're in, and typically like the formations are chunked into certain patterns, and so you
Mm-hmm.
recognize the patterns that you're in. But for the most part, it's things like a jump shot that's completely repetitive. You know exactly how it feels, and you can watch others shooting, and it feels like you're shooting after a time. And this is one of the big revelations from like so studying a sports science degree, like the things you learn, right? Like I think this is one of the big things I got from it was learning that mental rehearsal can account for up to 80% of the result that you experience in terms of you've got physical practice, which was 100% of the result. That's like obviously the gold standard, but in some studies, people were getting improvements of up to 80% of what they would have experienced if they had have practiced in a physical form. And obviously, I think in those studies, they were kind of mid intermediate practitioners, or maybe there was some beginners. So it might not be ringing true for experts, but not suggesting that I'm an expert by any means. But I think it was just incredibly fascinating to think that by simply thinking about practicing, you can seriously put yourself in a position where your skill acquisition improves dramatically, and it ties into that idea that the brain is absolutely no separate from the body. Everything in the body is controlled by the brain itself. So what did you find when you were kind of thinking about rehearsal, or did you do it for much of your CrossFit, or was it more golf?
Well, I learned the habits in golf. I mean, I played golf when I was younger, and I played. I was reading books about visualization and mental preparation for golf when I was sort of 16, 17, and practicing, um, visualizing different shots and visualizing each shot every time you hit a golf ball, and the visualizing thing was so deeply ingrained from a young age when I was playing golf, that by the time I got to CrossFit, it just seemed like it was. Well, this is going to sound a bit ridiculous, but with CrossFit, I always felt like there was the physical thing, right? Like you could either do a thing or you couldn't do that thing in CrossFit. Like if weight was too heavy for you to lift, if it was outside of the realm of reality for what you can lift, you couldn't just miraculously lift another 100 kilos. Like there may be another 10%, but not another 50 or 60%, right? So you knew what you needed to be able to, you knew what you could do before you go in there, and nothing else would impact on your outcome other than you doing it, right? Like the weight didn't, no one walked up and pushed you when you tried to lift the weight. Like you wouldn't like get a bad bounce, or like something, a stick be in the way when you're trying to do a clean and jerk or a gymnastic movement. Like it was just you. And so it felt super, super comfortable for me to be like, well, this is easy to deliver on because you've already done it 1,000 times over, and there's no other variables this time other than what's in here, right? Like the only difference is that there's a few thousand people watching you and yelling and carrying on, and then you're in the competition. But other than that, it's no different to what you did, thousands of times in the gym before that. So you would just go out, do that, deliver on what you need to do, and then you're done. And it was just a matter of effort. Whereas in golf, like it doesn't matter how much effort you put in, so many things could impact your result, right? Like it's hard to even, like wind and lies and how the ball bounces on a particular thing. You hit a shot that you think's perfect, and there's a bloody plastic drain head grate right at the front of the green that you just the spot where you thought you needed to land the ball, and it bounces out into the trees. And so there's so many things that could impact the result that's out of your control almost, that it becomes an even bigger mind game, because then all the things that go wrong, you then have to navigate mentally, and overcome those to then be able to focus on visualizing the next one. And for every bad shot you hit, then you've got this image in your head of the bad one. And when you get up there, you got to kind of wipe that one out somehow and do the next good one. So it was sort of, it kind of set me up really well, I think, playing golf, for being able to do other things well from a mental perspective and a visualization perspective. When I was younger, though, I had a lot of trouble visualizing myself internally in first person. I would always struggle I always had this picture of another person doing it, or a picture of what I looked like on video, and filming myself swinging, and then the good ones, what they looked like. And that's what I wanted to look like. So in my head, when I tried to visualize a shot, I'd be visualizing this picture of somebody watching me hit the golf ball. And it was only when I started to practiced enough, trying to play by feel in terms of the visualizing, like you said, from a first person, and visualizing the flight of the ball and how it's going to land and the things that are happening, not what I look like when I did it, did I start to really improve a lot. So, and that's a big part of why we have very few mirrors in the clinic, because everybody wants the mirrors. There's mirrors in the gym, and there's mirrors I want to be able to see myself doing this thing so I can do it better. But you don't walk down the street with a mirror available. So it's such a tiny part of your day that you have this visual feedback to be able to improve the pattern, that then people become dependent on that feedback loop to be able to do it well. And so that was something that's great in CrossFit. They didn't have mirrors anywhere, never. Now I think there's probably a happy medium there where people could have been handy for people to see how bad they were doing things sometimes. but fundamentally, the idea is that you have to feel what you're doing. When you're learning and the coach is teaching you something, you need to actually experience it, not just see what the mirror is punching back at you and trying to adjust that. And so people then acquire these new skill sets that last. And we do the same thing with the rehab programs. The neuromuscular training component of the rehab programs is huge, because you have to have a foundation of motor learning before you can build the strength and power and speed and everything on top of that. Otherwise, you're just supercharging a go-kart, and it's going to lose control.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember looking at some research on that, and it suggested that two things, like when you're using a mirror, the feedback that you're getting is delayed. So you're not adjusting in real time, because your brain is actually a feed forward mechanism. So by the time you get that visual stimulus of the mirror, it's too late to adequately form a correction, and it's just a delayed feedback loop, and it's not as effective as actually being able to feel the movement and impact it in real time. And then also you've got the idea that when performing a skill, if you interrupt your brain's motor pathway, and it's that idea of, I get it in basketball all the time, if you think about how you're shooting it, like you're trying to adjust your elbow, you shoot terribly. That's that internally focused versus externally focused. And, a lot of people think, I need to use a mirror to adjust my technique, but that's why we focus so much on our cueing, and it's a really important part of the way we deliver exercise, because if you focus on a mirror and how your body feels, which is internal cueing, then you're not going to be able to perform the skill as effectively as you could if you understood external cues and how it kinesthetically feels, which is how your body essentially feels. So that's a big one of the mirror. Like it's a myth to squash, and I think it's still useful, but sometimes, or a lot of the time, it's not quite as useful as people would think.
I find it really helpful as a magnifying glass or a highlighter for people who aren't kinesthetically aware. So people that don't really, some people, you would say they come in and they have a really deep understanding, probably too deep understanding of all of the feelings that they have in their body, all of this, and I feel like my shoulder sits here, and I feel like this one, and I feel like I constantly feel like I'm battling this, and if I'm put this way, my knee feels a bit funny, and if I go this way, it feels okay, and I'm not really sure, and it feels, I don't know, and they're adjusting stuff, and they're constantly trying to, and they're hyper aware. And then there's the people who are like, I don't know, my knee hurts. Be like, do you know, have you noticed that your knee's really collapsing in when you're stepping? No, I've never noticed that before. And you're like, can you feel the difference between the left and right? No, no, can't feel it any different. And then you can position them in a better spot. Do you feel the difference there? No, feels the same. And they just have no, I guess the sensitivity to that, their body movement and position in space is just not refined. And I haven't given it any attention. So they don't really know. And mirrors become super helpful for them because or even just filming and then showing it back to them, because then they're like, holy, seriously? Does it go in that much? I can see that. That can't be good. I should definitely not do that. But they can't feel it, so they have to see it. But then once they've seen it, then they can start to pay attention to the feelings and where they need to be positioned differently in order to get a different result. But 110% relying on that feedback is a bad approach. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so powerful to see yourself. I think at times you get delusional about what you actually look like, and then you watch a video, and I guess it's just like, oh God. I think that's one advantage of having a coach. It's really helpful there. It's one thing I really regret. If I could go back in time, I'd get a coach for a lot of the things I was really trying to do well.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
mean, all of those principles apply to everything else, though, right? Like my father-in-law, I remember he telling stories about, like, he's an academic, and him telling stories about, well, he didn't have enough money for pencils, lots of pencils. So when he was studying, he would snap the lead off the pencil, and he would just write his study notes out without lead in it, so that it was not actually wasting any lead. But it would help him remember his notes. And because he was obviously had a kinesthetic connection, like the more stimulus you have in different mediums coming at you, the greater the connections, and the ability to draw on that information when you need it another time. And so his was pretending to write the notes out, in order to. For me, I'm a writing person too, like, as well as anybody. Like, I mean, for me to really think it helps me to think more in a more structured fashion if I can write things down on a whiteboard as I'm doing it. If I don't have that, I end up like, I have all these ideas, like, I'm blah, 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 around in my head, and then it gets a bit of a mess, and communicating it gets a bit out of disjointed. And so having that ability to physically put stuff down helps me kind of map a more linear thought process out. And knowing that, again, back to skill acquisition, knowing that helps me now do things more efficiently, because I can just go, I don't need to work, like, this isn't going to work for me. Get me that thing, get me this thing. I can write this down, fill this out. That works, make some notes, and then I can use my time much more effectively, tying those experiential learning and visual into my learning experience, versus it being just like, no, I have to read this textbook, and that's the only way I'm going to get this done. Like, it doesn't work that way
yeah, that's so
for me.
interesting. I mean, Jackie, who was on before, she was actually talking about when she did some graphics for teaching some of the key concepts in the legal profession, and she was talking about how she used colors and references to cartoons and things like that to really teach and summarize a lot of key information into a useful infographic. And I think that's why we've had the revolution of the infographics recently. Everything you go on Instagram, it looks like every man and his dog's got an infographic, but because they communicate so much information in a concise way that's memorable and agrees with the brain. And I think it all ties back to that initial concept of you got to you've got to consider the rules and the physiology of the vehicle that we're operating, which is the body, and then kind of using those rules, you can come up with ways to, I guess, use the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, to speed up that skill acquisition. So I guess we touched on a few things there, and again, apologies to everyone. We said we were going to try to keep it at 30 minutes, but the conversation just got a bit too good, and we just kept going on.
I'm gonna follow the lifelong journey with Jackie and try to work on talking less. But I'm not. I've stopped biting my fingernails, but I haven't given up on talking too much just yet. That's the work in progress.
Yeah, I think when you get two people that suffer from that affliction, it's always a great recipe for a life car.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to sum up what we really talked about, and Bretta's on now actually as well. I don't know if she's still there, but she jumped on. Would have been well, it will be great to get some insights from Bretta in the near future, because I'm sure she'd have a few thoughts on this topic. But I think we really kind of covered a whole bunch of things and touched on some of the points that we think are really important about skill acquisition. And for everyone that listened in and everyone that does listen to this, it'd be great to get some ideas of the areas that you really liked about what we talked about, because Luke himself is a wealth of knowledge of a whole range of things that he's done and practical experiences, and we really enjoy this topic, as you can probably see by the animation in talking about some of the things. So hopefully you guys get a lot from it, and we will provide some show notes, some resources. I've put a link in the description of one of the language posts that I use, but really keen to kind of delve deeper into some of these topics and maybe touch on some of the things that we do in our programs as well. Is there anything else you want to add before we round up, Luke?
It'd be good to hear from some of the people in the community as well, who their experiences with this. Like, I know that there's lots of different people with lots of different skill sets in the community, and how they go about absorbing and using and developing skills, and even how they navigate large amounts of information to be able to distill things down into the most meaningful components. So we have some people in the community that have very, very demanding jobs and lives, and managed to navigate that really, really well. So if there's any insights or information that the community have to offer, we'd love to hear it. I think it'd be really some really unique insights there.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think I might do a bit of a poll this week. Just what are we focusing on, and what are we learning? We'll kind of refine it a bit, but we'll reach out into the community, because I certainly know from the conversations I've had, there's a lot of experience in this community. So that'd be great to hear from you guys. And well, that was another empowering insights episode. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Again, let us know what you think about the format. Do you prefer the pre-recorded version? Do you prefer a shorter episode, longer episode? Share us with your insights. We're keen to continue doing this. So thanks for listening and checking in, and we'll speak to you guys in the coming week within the community. Thanks, LK. Great chat.
See you guys.
See you guys. Cheers.